Hi, my name is Tevis, and this is Texture Notes, a channel where I talk about the books I've been reading, the shows I've been watching, and the games I've been playing. So for this first video, I want to look back briefly at some of my best media experiences of 2024. I'll just be talking about a few of the best, not my complete top 10 lists. If you're interested, I do keep more complete lists and ratings on my website throughout the year, and I'll link those in the description below. Also, I'm pretty new to this, and my recording space isn't soundproof at all. It was also too hard to record all of this in one go, so I hope the sound mixing isn't too jarring. Okay, first, the books. Last year was a pretty strong year for me book-wise. I want to cover a few highlights very briefly, and then spend a bit more time on my favorite book of the year. So first, and just outside my top 10, but worth noting, especially this year, was A Last Supper of Queer Apostles by Pedro Lemebel, translated by Gwendolyn Harper. This is a collection of short pieces about queer life and queer resistance under dictatorship. And Lemebel's language is itself just overflowing with life. The book is very powerful, feels very vital, especially right now. The best story collection I read last year was Rejection by Tony Tulatamuti. This is a mean, nasty, hilarious book that's honestly not my usual style, but it's so wholly committed to its theme, its title, Rejection, that I ended up really respecting it in the end. The style of the book reflects this. It is this consistently self-enclosed, kind of curdled, circling the drain, sort of almost like an Ouroboros style. And this style is really committed to, spiraling to the bitter, bitter end, even into the epilogue. The best academic book I read last year, though it's written for a general audience, was The Chapter by Nicholas Dames. So this book takes up something that is often overlooked, the chapter division of texts. It's something that's practically invisible, almost feels like, a natural feature of the world or of books. But it's not. It has a history, and Dames takes us through that history with a really deft hand and a really wonderful voice, one that was a pleasure to spend time with, which is super rare among academic writers. The basic question it explores is, how do we divide a text? How do we divide a story? Really, how do we divide time itself? It was this last question that really stayed with me afterwards. That question of how do we divide our lives, the ceaseless flow, the ongoingness of our lives. How should we divide it, and why do we do that in the first place? Next, the best ancient classic that I read was The Epic of Gilgamesh, translated by Gerald Davis. So this is one of the oldest stories ever written down, and Davis's translation is very readable. His language is kind of got weight, but it's quite energetic. It's brisk and direct, at times punchy, and usually quite poetic. The epic is about grief and mortality for even the most fortunate man, Gilgamesh, almost like an extreme test case. Gilgamesh is someone who has it all that someone could have in this life, but still loses in the end. It's not about the loss of his life and that fear, but the loss of his best friend, Enkidu, and how he deals with that. The book has got these really wonderful repetitions, and I mean exact repetitions, when he's traveling and one day will be a paragraph that was exactly repeated the next day. At first, this is a little strange because in modern books, you have to vary even the sentences. You wouldn't repeat anything like that. But the repetition here creates this really interesting, almost hypnotic effect where you begin to feel that it's describing reality, as if they found the right words and they're sticking to them. This is the metaphysics of Gilgamesh's world. And then when it does change, it's quite striking because it's been these exact repetition of blocks of text. It's quite powerful. The book is also full of these really strong images that stayed with me. At the end, there is an image of a tomb built under a river, as if, beneath the constant flow of life, there is always death. The book has a lot of things like that. Really, really powerful. Okay, next is the best novel I read. Now, usually on my lists, fiction, often novels dominate the top spots, but this year, the best fiction I read was only the third best book of 2024 for me. And that book, that novel, was All Fours by Miranda July. So this book is, simply put, a page-turner about perimenopause. I could not put it down. I could not stop reading it. I couldn't read it fast enough. It is a kind of autofiction, seemingly. I'm not sure how much, but the character sure seems like July. And she is an artist in her mid-40s, facing perimenopause and trying to figure out what that means for her life. She decides to go on this big road trip across America, but it's over basically before it even starts. She gets 30 miles down the highway, takes an exit, checks into a motel, and promptly starts to redecorate the motel to recreate a moment from earlier in her life, almost like Tom McCarthy's Remainder, this trying to exactly recreate lost places and times. And then from there, the book goes in directions that are kind of impossible to predict. Through this story, July really seems like she's making a kind of declaration of life right in the middle of midlife. This is a time that is often characterized as being kind of muted, muffled, depressing, even, where you're really, the midlife crisis, which is usually the province of men in stories. And July's really trying to reclaim that here and show us everything that she's feeling at this stage in her life. She really puts it all out there, hilariously, but it's really a great part of the appeal of this book, the way that she says things, everything that she's thinking and feeling, things that feel forbidden, desires that she's not sure she's supposed to feel as she gets older, and really makes them sayable. It's almost like she's giving you, the reader, permission, because if she can say them, then maybe you could too. It reminded me how much, to me, a writer's first responsibility always is to tell the truth. Even through the lies of fiction, to tell the truth. Why? Well, yes, for yourself, you need to tell the truth. But another huge reason is you tell the truth to help others tell the truth. Truth is contagious. And when you say things that are hard to say, things that feel forbidden, others, certainly this reader, you feel like, maybe I could say more than I do. Maybe I could admit more. Maybe I could, in admitting it, pursue it and make it more real. And this book takes very seriously that idea of changing your life, maybe destroying your life, but in pursuit of life, of a life that you not just deny yourself, but maybe think has passed you by or it's too late. This book, not just in its story, but in its very voice, makes that feel too late. It's just not true. Next, the second best book I read in 2024, and the best nonfiction book, at least about other people, was Working by Studs Terkel. So the subtitle of this book is People Talk About What They Do All Day and How They Feel About What They Do. Pretty accurate description. This is a diverse and very rich oral history of work life in the early 1970s. It is about how people spend their days working, how they spend their time, even their schedule. I loved seeing those details of, what time people had to get up. What was their morning routine like? What was their commute like? What were their breaks? What did they do at work? How was their time off at night? What shift did they work? What were their weekends like and vacations? All of that. I love to know those details. Terkel interviews over 100 people in a range of jobs. He talks to auto workers, salesmen and saleswomen, cashiers, elevator operators. Even Pauline Kael shows up at one point kind of representing critics. It's very short, but she's there. Now, he interviews, I don't know exactly his method for this. I mean, he clearly interviewed everyone. There are direct quotes, but he seems to take like what they say and using his own kind of style to create these portraits. His style being this kind of mid-century masculine prose, short sentences, strong nouns and verbs, a punchy tone. But it works. It creates these really vibrant portraits of people and their jobs that was just a pleasure to read, frankly. The book does have its limits. Turkle talks to many more men than women. The idea of racial diversity here is mostly black and white and mostly white. And geographically, it's mostly centered on the Midwest and East Coast. But you can tell Turkle, within his own limits, is definitely trying. He's trying to talk to as many different people as he can about their work life. I would love, to read an updated version of this book. I would love to read about jobs that didn't exist, 50 years ago, but are so prevalent now. I would love to see much broader demographics, diversity of people that he talks to. I would love to see interviews with people outside the U.S. because the American kind of work ethic, the American attitude towards work, the Protestant work ethic shows up again and again. Turkle is clearly aligned with working people, with labor. And while many people are showing us how they make meaning of their work, of their days and their lives, very movingly, he also, lets people talk about all of the darkness and the difficulties, some really deep criticisms, but also just, letting people be miserable, failing to make meaning sometimes, not sure why they're doing what they're doing. He lets everyone speak, and it's really wonderful. This book, and Turkle himself, it just has such a clear love of people. He loves people. You can feel this when you're reading it, and this is probably the thing that I loved more than anything else about this book. This love of humanity, love of individual lives and stories, love of the struggle to make meaning of work or not. It's all there, and the book is just amazing. Okay, now, finally, I want to talk about my very favorite book of 2024, and that was Alphabetical Diaries by Sheila Heti. This book, as the title says, it is Sheila Heti's diaries alphabetized by the first word of each sentence. This might sound like a fairly straightforward, simple kind of procedure she's applied to her diaries, and it is. But there's a little more to it than that. First, the diaries she's using cover about a 10-year period in her life, in her 20s and 30s, apparently. And I think I read about 500,000 words. This book is about 50,000 words. So she has cut 90% of the diaries away, meaning that she is choosing what sentences, alphabetically arranged as they are going to butt up against each other. She is really choosing what stays and what goes, and most stuff is going to go. She's working here within, with a constraint, basically, right? This has got its own tradition in experimental literature, the Oulipo, most famously, the French collective, where you take, a constraint, a rule of sorts, and you apply it to a work or produce the work according to this rule to see what happens, to maybe generate something new, some effect. This can sometimes just be an intellectual exercise, but at its best, these constraints can really produce some evocative and powerful results. To be honest, I almost didn't read this. I saw the title, thought, I get it. I even read a bit of a sample and was like, interesting. And this is with me even loving Sheila Heti. I first read her in, I think, 2012 with How Should a Person Be, a book I absolutely loved. A few years later, I read Motherhood, where she is trying to decide as an artist whether to have a child or not. Now, I didn't love her more recent novel, Pure Color, but overall, I love Sheila Heti. And yet this book I kind of passed by. But fortunately, my sister, knowing I loved Heti, gave me a copy last summer. It's one of the only books I physically read last year because living in China, I just don't have access to many physical books, and I have to read ebooks. But I had this book, and I read it a little bit at a time over a few weeks, and was utterly transfixed by it. The book has this kind of hypnotic effect. It put me in this very meditative state each night when I would read it. I felt really caught in it in kind of unexpected ways. The alphabet itself, this is an order that is so familiar to us, but is still basically arbitrary. It feels like it's fundamental, like it is the natural order of words or the world, but it's not. And as you get into it, you begin to feel like a bit estranged from something that is so familiar to you. The book is full of these constant, unexpected juxtapositions, these unanticipated connections that you don't see coming, really. You know, a relationship will end in one sentence and then begin in the next, just by alphabetic chance, by that logic. The moods will shift very sharply. In one sentence, you'll have someone dying. In the next sentence, an errand that she's going on, right up against each other. You have like the logic of causality and kind of emotional history broken by the logic of A, then B, then C. It also makes you really attentive to words, such that when you get to the sentences that begin because, you get some feel for her, the way that she understands why things happen, why the because, what is the cause of things. You get to the parts that start, the sentences that start don't. There's these kind of like commands she's giving to herself, these admonitions, or just do this. It's fascinating. The I chapter is gigantic. All the sentences that start with I, the ifs, all grouped together. The she sentences, the they sentences, the theirs, all the theirs, there, this, there is this, there, which are not there anymore. They've been stripped of that sense by the alphabetization. There's the todays and the tomorrows and the yesterdays near the end of the book, those sentences that start with that word. And those words are all so confident but almost innocent now, and wrong because of what the alphabet did to them. This book, breaks Hetty's diary down to the unit of the sentence. That's what's alphabetized. The sentence is the unit of time. It is the moment. It is the moments that have had the link stripped away. She could have alphabetized, I guess, by diary entry or by paragraph or by word. Word, I guess, would have created a kind of index. Kind of interesting. But it's the sentence. And Hetty's sentences, I've known this, reading her for years, are just fantastic. Her style, her sentences are light but deep. Her sentences are very earnest, almost innocent. I mean, they're not, but they have that feel, that affect, but very wise. They seem effortless, her sentences, but they're not. They are full of all of her anxieties, but the sentences themselves are not strained. Her syntax is not like that. She has this clarity, unencumbered almost in her style, even when she's laying out all her worries on the page. The feeling that I got the more I read of this was of this attempt to almost escape the self, the diary self, right? But also this corresponding sense that you can't escape the self. It's clearly still Hetty there on the page. I can feel her. There's still a recognizable person there, a sensibility, a texture of self in her sentences. And she can't escape this, even through alphabetization. But she can reorder it, right? She can rearrange. She can almost index herself. It's like the book is seeking a liberation from the self at a certain time, in a certain place. In that way, it almost felt like a post-apocalyptic diary to me. The apocalypse of yourself, of your world, is over. It definitely has this kind of aesthetic feeling of afterwards throughout. When you strip the context from things, when you strip the links between sentences, it can create some really interesting effects. I was thinking of the post-apocalyptic novel Canticle for Leibowitz. In that book, a monk finds a shopping list from our time and mistakes this kind of for a holy relic. So you have, a can of tomatoes and things like that when stripped of their context, take on this new resonance. And this happens in Hetty's book. We don't always know the details of what she's talking about, but stripped of that context, they resonate in on a different frequency. They have more weight, actually. You read slower than you would in a diary. You're not caught up in it. You have just enough distance to see them differently. Not as a holy relic, but, as something that has got a new weight, possibly a new meaning. The book is fundamentally, kind of feels like it's against time. It's against nostalgia. It's against that narrowing of adult life where it becomes so focused on what you need to do to survive or thrive or whatever it is, that narrowing. This is kind of blowing your life outward, scattering it into pieces, and then recollecting them and ordering them not according to your will, but according to some other design, the alphabet here. And I feel like the book in this way offered a method, an example of a way to see yourself anew that was really quite inspiring to me. The possibility to see yourself anew through writing, through constraint too. And I think it was that, that sense of a newness that really made Alphabetical Diaries so exciting to me. And in the end, the best book I read in 2024. Okay, now I want to move to the best shows that I watched in 2024. Last year was not a particularly strong year TV-wise for me, although my top show is now an all-time favorite, and I'll spend the most time talking about that. I just want to mention two others briefly before I talk about my favorite. The first was the best anime that I watched last year. That was Nichijou, sometimes translated as My Ordinary Life. Nichijou is a series of vignettes about small town and high school life. It's extremely inventive, unpredictable, very, very funny. It can feel quite wild at times because there's no clear boundary in the show between characters' inner lives and outer worlds. All those distinctions are kind of collapsed, and this felt quite true to life to me because in our world, I don't think there's any clear boundary between inner and outer either. I really liked how Nichijou took its characters' anxieties and small kind of everyday dramas very seriously. Things like, forgotten homework or a joke you tell that doesn't land, or just that constant question of what other people think of you. These are especially things that are heightened when we're teenagers, but never really go away. Nichijou does all this taking seriously with a very, very light touch, which I just loved. I'm a person who is drawn to heavy things. I am myself, unfortunately, too heavy in how I handle things, how I talk about things. So I really appreciate a light touch like this. It makes things that are often excruciating instead something exhilarating, often profound, and certainly hilarious. The other show that I want to mention that also broke down the boundary between inner and outer was my second favorite show of last year, and that was Interior Chinatown. So I'll try to be brief, but this show is basically about its main character, Willis Wu. He works at a restaurant in Chinatown and discovers that he is not quite the main character in his life, in the show he's on, but a background character in another show, a police procedural. He tries to push back against this and finds very quickly the limits of being a background character. For instance, he wants to report something to the police, but he cannot get into the police station, like literally cannot get in the door. As a background character, he's not granted, admission. Instead, he has to take on a new role of a delivery guy that is allowed access to the police station. But even once he's in there, he's basically invisible to the cops. And then he goes on to other roles, a tech guy, a police sidekick, and these give him, different ways to move through the world. I kept while watching this expecting there to be like some big explanation that this was all in Willis's mind, or maybe there was some, big science fiction conceit that was explaining how these realities were so warped. But thankfully that never comes. It's never explained. You do find out more about this world. There are secrets. But the big revelation to make sense of what's happening, that never comes. Instead, Interior Chinatown just posits this mediated reality as the way things are. It offers a really kind of striking vision of our mediated lives, where there's no clear division between inner and outer, no division between the show and life. There's no simple way out of this. In fact, the show by the end says quite straightforwardly that there's no ultimate escape. You can only jump from one show to another. You can't really get outside the television. Now, I can often find shows that make this kind of meta move kind of annoying, kind of an escape into self-consciousness, as if you can actually get outside of reality, get some proper distance, not be affected like everyone else. You can know like other people can't. But the mediated reality of interior Chinatown is presented as something inescapable and something that is shared by everyone. It is a mass consensual illusion that not just has the force of reality, but the logic from which reality itself is made comes from this illusion, from this mediation. And what, interior Chinatown says is that this mediated reality we all share, this is it. This is our world. Now, everything I'm describing obviously applies to Willis's experience as an Asian American man, but it's not limited to that. Many characters in the show develop various levels of awareness about this situation, this mediation, and the idea is that what Interior Chinatown says about our mediated lives applies to everyone inside and outside the screen watching. One character in particular I found very moving was Willis's mother, Lily Wu. She is trying to redefine herself in late midlife as in other roles outside of being Willis's mother, being a wife. She's trying to discover who else she might be. And I found this character very moving. I found the actress playing her face I loved her face. I felt that she just really made this, at times, heady premise really grounded, really real, really relatable. Also, the lighting in the show is amazing. Again and again, in each episode, the lighting would shift. The color would change. Lights would go on and off as if in a movie set. And these lighting changes were often used to signal a shift in reality, a shift in genre, a shift in the rules of the world. I found this quite exciting because I think lighting in our own world is super important. If I'm in a room, the difference between an overhead light and a lamp light, that's a fundamental difference in my experience of the room. When you change lights, you change the room. My memory will shift. My sense of what's possible in a space shifts depending on the lighting. And Interior Chinatown does some really wonderful things with this idea. Now, the show does have some problems. It's by no means perfect. Some of the characters, as wonderful as many of them are, some of them do not quite work. The middle of the show drags a bit. It's a few episodes too long. And the ending, while quite moving in ways and quite bracing in its facing of the inescapableness of the situation, I'm not sure it totally works. 6 months later, I'm still not sure. But even with some of these problems, I found Interior Chinatown to be like no other show I had seen last year or in many years. And its vision of our mediated lives I found to be just bold and thrilling television. Now, finally, I want to take a little time to describe what makes my favorite show of 2024 so extraordinary. And that show is Bluey. Now, before last summer, I knew nothing about Bluey. I knew it as a cultural phenomenon. I was vaguely aware of what it looked like, the images. But it wasn't until my daughter began to become interested in watching things that Bluey came into my life. Now, usually when I watch a show, I really like to give it my full attention. I like to watch every episode in order, no distractions, no phones, no second screens of any sort. And I like to watch it over time. If it's a show that comes out week to week, then I really enjoy watching it in those weeks. If it's an older show, then I will parse it out, 1, 2 a day at max. I don't really like to binge. I don't want to condense a season of television into a weekend. For me, a lot of the power of television comes in its relationship to time, watching shows in time and over time. Growing up, it was just a big part of my experience that a show like Cheers came on Thursday nights. It it was attached to Thursday. Roseanne was attached to Tuesday. I know that's not the case so much with shows anymore, but I liked that quality. And I liked watching them over time in a year, over a season. But I couldn't quite watch Bluey like I prefer, because I watched every episode with my daughter. And being 2 years old this year, the constant demands of childcare meant that Bluey could simply not have my full attention like I'm used to. She had my attention, and childcare, is a million little things constantly happening that will take you away. Now, I have seen, I believe, every episode at this point, not in order, but all, 152 or so episodes I have seen, all with her, never alone, really. Some I've seen just one time, some I've seen 10 or 20 times. There's a lot of chance involved in what I've ended up seeing. Now, the first thing I noticed when watching Bluey with her was just how seriously the show took childhood, took children, their experiences, their worlds, how seriously it took them. I'm already interested in this. Last year I watched a series of shorts by the Hubleys, and a couple years before that I watched Skinamarink, a horror film focused on the fears of children in mundane spaces of the house interiors and stuff like that. I'm really interested in art that takes children's perspectives seriously, and Bluey completely does this. Not just the show itself, but the adult characters in the show take the kids seriously. I've never seen parents be as game to play with their children in the way that they do in Bluey. It's remarkable. And it's not just the Healer family, Bluey, Bingo, Bandit, and Chili. It's not just their family that is taken seriously. It is all the kids, all the classmates. You'll have some episodes where Bluey or Bingo doesn't even show up hardly. It'll focus on some other child. And the show takes the adults quite seriously, too. A lot of kids shows can focus on the kids, but then the adults become these kind of like appendages, or, you have Nanny's socks from like Muppet Babies, and that's all she is, or these, kind of distant guides. They're not real people, but in Bluey, they absolutely are. Bluey takes all of its characters seriously. Everyone is real here. So I noticed that first, but very quickly, what really surprised me were the formal qualities of Bluey. The colors, the line work, the framing and composition, all were just gorgeous. And it drew my eyes in a way that if you watch other kids' shows, she was also into Peppa Pig, Daniel Tiger, and those shows are like just nothing to look at. Bluey has got this depth in its image that is really striking. Even more striking was the pacing of this show. Each episode, those 150 episodes, are 7 minutes each. The 7 minutes is not very long to tell a story. And to be able to fit your story so that 7 minutes does not feel rushed or does not feel stretched out, to get the scope of your story right, fit it to that 7 minutes, that's not easy. Television shows, they really struggle with this sometimes. You have shows, are stretched out over an old season model, or they're condensed, trying to get through something too quickly. The last season of Game of Thrones kind of famously was like this. So to be able, again and again, 7 minute, perfectly paced, perfectly timed, it's just shocking. Honestly, I was just episode after episode like, how are they pulling this off? It would be so easy to mess it up, so easy. And not just those 7 minutes, but at the end of the 7 minutes, they find the most perfect endings. It was constantly surprising to me how they would find some joke to land on before they cut the credits, to some moment of beauty, some reversal, some grace note, to something, and a music cue that would come in right perfectly again and again and again. There's a level of consistency that Bluey achieves that I've seen in very few other art forms. Also, adding to all this, the voice acting is amazing. So many kids shows have kids who are either, you can tell they're acting, or it's adults trying to sound like kids, or any number of things. But here, the main children, I believe they're voiced by children of the production staff of this show, not named, and they are the most natural, believable, children I've ever heard. Their laughter, I mean, the giggles in this show, these are like best in class giggles of all the shows I ever watch. Amazing, amazing. The adults too. Chili's voice is something else. She is somehow extremely warm, her voice, but also extremely playful and also extremely tired. And it's this combination that is like extremely attractive, extremely just speaks to her character. I couldn't take my eyes off of the way it looked. I couldn't take my ears off of it either. The show actually just has so many wonderful characters. Chili's amazing, but my favorite is probably Bingo. She is Bluey's younger sister. She's 4 years old. She is imaginative and sweet and very sensitive, very easily hurt. There's this vulnerability to her. She lets the world touch her. Bluey's a little kind of floats through things sometimes. I mean, she's sensitive in her own way, but Bingo's always reacting to something, and you can feel that she, even at 4, really herself feels the world very intensely. She's also quite brave. She will often be the one who stands up to a bully. There's not a lot of bullies in Bluey, but sometimes characters go a little wrong, and Bingo will often say something. She won't quite let things go and let everybody just get back to it, which I really like that about her. A lot of the kids in the class, in Bingo and Bluey's class, are wonderful. Mackenzie, Rusty is like the greatest little dude. I don't always get along so easily with little boys, but Rusty, like a stand-up little guy in a very sweet way. Muffin is Bluey and Bingo's younger cousin. She's 3, and she is a complete nightmare. Every time she comes on the screen, it's just like, oh shit, like what is Muffin gonna do? Her little scratchy voice starts and she just like unleashes hell. And she's amazing. One of the great things about the show is that even for a character that the show has no delusions about how difficult and wild Muffin is, it also sees her strengths too. There's an episode called Granny Mobile where one granny is doing a yard sale trying to get rid of an old electric wheelchair, which Muffin at the sale kind of like takes as her own. When another granny comes along to buy it, this really mean, little nasty granny comes and wants to undercut the price, and Muffin won't let her have it. And at first, what seems like a belligerent child turns into this great struggle of wills between Muffin and this mean little granny. And Muffin ends up like jacking up the price because the nice granny having the yard sale doesn't know how to stand up for herself. So that by the end, that little granny has to pay to the nose. And the nice granny learns something from Muffin, like it's not we got to teach Muffin to be better. No, the adults got to learn from Muffin too. It's really wonderful. So many of the episodes are just amazing. There's an episode called Rain where it's a silent episode. All it is about a rainstorm where Bluey tries to keep the rain from going down the sidewalk, create kind of a makeshift dam, and finally getting Chili to join in. Beautiful. There's an episode called Turtle Boy where a little stuffed turtle gets left at the playground and different kids, play with him and want to take him home, but they end up, being convinced to leave him. Very simple seeing different children play with the same toy. It's really beautiful. There's an episode called Pass the Parcel where it kind of takes on generational change with this game, whether the modern version where everyone wins or an older version where, just there's one winner. It takes that up really smartly, really hilarious. There's an episode called Cricket that focuses on Rusty. He's a master little cricket player. Beautiful ending with his little sister, just very moving. One of my favorite episodes is called Handstand. Now, in this episode, focuses on Bingo at a family party. She's just trying to do a handstand. She's 4, this isn't easy, and she not only wants to do it, but she needs a witness. So she'll ask different kids at the party, can you watch me do this handstand? So she'll try it and fail while they're watching, and let me try again. Then she gets it, but they're distracted. Again and again, she can't quite time getting the handstand and having someone watch her. Now, the camera's fixed on her, everybody's going wild around her like family parties are. This isn't enough for the whole episode, but halfway through, it cuts to Bingo's grandmother, Nana. She's at the party too, and she's looking for something to do. Everybody seems to have a job. Everybody seems to have a role. And Nana, wants to be helpful. But everybody's like, Nana, go sit down, relax. And she's like, I don't know how to relax. She's looking for something to do. And then she comes across Bingo. Bingo wants to be seen, and Nana wants to see her. It's really quite beautiful the way they find each other at this family party, the youngest and the oldest. Both in lonely at this party. I know how lonely family parties can be, and this episode shows that quite beautifully in bringing those two characters together. Oh, it's extremely moving. Probably the most moving episode. It's quite famous among Bluey watchers at this point. Is called Sleepy Time. Describing this episode won't get it how it's so powerful. It's really the execution. The idea is that Bingo is trying to do a big girl sleep, which means going to sleep in her own bed, waking up in her own bed. Not easy for a child. My daughter has just been learning this herself. In this episode, she does this. She begins to fall asleep, thinking about the book she was just read about space, and so in her dream she goes into space. Now the whole episode kind of cuts back and forth between Bingo's dream and space and the kind of like nighttime goings on of the healer house, the sleepwalking, asking for water. At one point, Bandit loses his place in bed to one of his kids and he's on the floor with a pair of underwear as a blanket. It's very funny, very real, and yet the focus on Bingo and her struggle for independence and overcoming her fears. When she finally remembers her mother who told her she would always be there for her and sees her as the son. It's so moving. And the ending of that episode, when the night is over and the actual sun rises, the music swells. It's unbelievable. That's an episode where whenever it comes on, I stop whatever I'm doing and just have to sit down and watch it and cry. The show really is full of so many moments of beauty that I feel sometimes in a lot of kids shows, in their race to kind of teach something, they end up like kind of digesting everything, turning it into a lesson. But Bluey is full of these moments of beauty, mystery, wonder, aspects of childhood that I remember very well, that I, as an adult, I'm always looking for. I remember those mysterious moments where the sun hits a certain way, or you get taken up by the dust motes in the light, or you see something that you don't understand, something that gets your head buzzing, some silence that you can't speak through. And Bluey really knows how to be quiet, how to let the image or the moment speak for itself. All this is to say that I find Bluey just such a deeply moving show. It is utterly committed to reality. These characters are all real. It sees them for who they are. It is not, fundamentally not a didactic show. There are lessons, occasionally Bandit especially will try to teach one, but it almost always either backfires or ends up being a lesson he himself needs to learn. The kids learn things sometimes accidentally or sometimes not. The adults do too. There's this constant interplay that is really funny, really real, if you're going to be honest about how little adults know. This is not trying to be good for you all the time. It's not a fantasy for kids or adults, not how things should be, as if anyone knows that. Instead, it has this commitment to a kind of realism that is just not only welcome in a show, but very, like I said, very, very moving. I often wonder if I would have loved Bluey as much as I do without watching it with my daughter. I don't know if that realism, lands harder because I have a child. I definitely know that, when I'm watching this is clearly made by someone with children. No one without a child could make this. They couldn't get the details. They couldn't get the feelings right. There's so much of parenting and having children that is just propaganda in society. I feel like I was constantly lied to before I had children about what it really means to have a child. Honestly, a child is a bomb. It's a bomb going off in your life, obliterates your former life. And even when you want that child, that bomb, you still end up missing, many aspects of your life before that bomb. You especially miss, the time to yourself And for me, I realized how much I missed being able to do things in my usual way, the media that I enjoyed, having time, giving my attention. I find that books and shows and games are even more important to me now than they were before she was born. I think really with the honesty and the realism of Bluey, what's often so touching about it is this reminder that how much not just children need to be seen, but parents, like everyone, need to be seen. Bluey really sees parents, sees the struggle, sees the joys, sees the exhaustion. And it's honest. The show is just very honest at all times about what it sees. I feel like children, like everyone, need honesty. Honesty is a form of respect. Honesty is a way to let children, decide things for themselves instead of, telling them what is right, what it is. And I feel like it's, in the end, this honesty, this realness, this humanity, along with the formal precision and inventiveness of the show, that makes Bluey not just my favorite show of 2024, but for me, one of the best shows of all time. Now, finally, for the last section on the best games I played in 2024. First, the best older game that I played last year, that was Red Faction Guerrilla. I believe this came out in 2008, and I missed it at the time, missed many things back then. It takes one of the best qualities, one of the best aspects of Grand Theft Auto, the ability to create chaos, to escalate, and to see how far you can go, to basically start blowing things up and see how long you can last until the cops either arrest or kill you. This game kind of takes that escalation and makes a whole game around it. It focuses on fighting an evil corporation on Mars, and to do that, it's not through gunplay or even that much driving. There is that in this game, but your main weapons, your main tools in this are a sledgehammer and C4. I mean, you get other stuff later on in the game, but I think I spent half the game with those two tools as my main things. Because, if you're going to fight a corporation, you don't shoot a corporation, you blow it up. So this focus on destruction with everything in the game, all the major buildings being destructible. They've got this kind of amazing destruction engine that still is quite impressive today. This is an old interest of mine, destruction in games. Not so much because I love destroying things, I mean, maybe, but more because destruction makes things feel really there. So many things in games are not destructible, right? They are, if not a permanent part of the environment, then they're just fake, backgrounds, skyboxes, stuff like that. So when something can be destroyed, and I don't just mean like with C4, but even, the underground in Super Mario Brothers 1-2, you break the bricks of the ceiling of the underworld. That, to me, made that place feel more real, feel more there. When you can destroy something, it makes it feel more real, more there. So this game really benefits from that, even as you are on Mars doing all this. Mars is, in fact, kind of like a perfect match because it's a very limited world. You're not in our world. You're not constantly running up against the limits of that. Grand Theft Auto is constantly teasing you with realism that it can't deliver on because you can't go in the buildings, and so much of it is just window dressing, just fake. Here, not only is so much of it destructible, but it's a Mars colony. There's not a whole lot of world to have to fake. So it's a really good match. Now, the game does have some really unfortunate difficulty spikes towards the end that were a little maddening, but I really love this not only for its destruction, for its focus. It's got a very clear ethics of fighting the corporation, which I loved, but it really was something where it did one thing really well and built a whole game around it. Didn't try to be all things, and didn't try to do everything. I just really enjoyed that. Next, the best music game I played was Country Star, which is a mobile game on my phone. This game is completely focused on country music. I am from Kentucky, but I don't have much background in country music. I grew up listening to pop music on the radio, or my piano teacher would teach me classical music or TV theme songs. But country music was kind of all around me in the background. It was not something I actively listened to. And yet, I feel some connection to it in some unexpected ways. I did get into alt country for a while in the 2000s, like Uncle Tupelo, but my understanding of country music is extremely limited, and yet I was drawn to play this game. I think its focus on genre, not just being a collection of good songs, but really focusing on country and all of its subgenres. It goes quite wide. There is honky-tonk, alt country, there is country pop, 90s country, kind of hip-hop country fusion. And by focusing on that, and then really emphasizing a lot of the qualities of country music that really I responded to, the sadness, the sourness, the focus on storytelling, and a kind of rebel spirit. A lot of the songs have this, this sense of life passing you by, and you made bad decisions and have regrets. There's something really primal and vulnerable about that. But also a lot of humor, both a kind of gallows humor, but also, being able to laugh at yourself and your fuck-ups. The more I played it, the more I really appreciated all these qualities in country music. Now, I didn't love all the songs. There's a song called Our Grass is Legal, which is like just a list of cliches, poorly sung in this sing-songy, like annoying way. And I mean, even the title, Our Grass is Legal, sounds like, a conservative idea of cleverness. But I kind of appreciated that it had songs I didn't like in it too. It gave me this breadth of country music so that I could kind of not just like find my favorite songs and go on my way, but have to play songs I didn't like. I did find many songs. Some I knew, when I started out, it starts you off with like Dolly Parton, Steve Earle, Shania Twain, whose Man, I Feel Like a Woman honestly just hits really differently for me now. But I found new people I didn't know at all. Charles Wesley Godwin, Zach Bryan, Colt Ford, Cody Jinks. I wouldn't have guessed that I liked them like I did, but I really did. Elle King, Miranda Lambert, Morgan Wade. Yeah, a lot of great music. There are some really annoying monetization things. When you play mobile games, you confront this. Now, I've been playing them phone games a long time, so I found many ways around it. In fact, the way that it limits the amount of time you can play, I kind of made to work to my advantage so that I just played a little each day without paying, as it kept trying to push me to. I tried a few season passes, which I enjoyed, but I basically was able to avoid most of the monetization. But still, it was annoying being there. You never get to a point where you can just play your favorite songs as much as you want. You're always in that framework, and that keeps it from being all that it could be. But it was a very exciting game that made me wanting to play other games that focused on a genre. I would love a game that was like this, that was all metal or all opera, something that I don't know real well, but I'm curious about. Yeah, I would love that. It was also really interesting to play Country Star in Chongqing in China. The American South, where I'm from, and country music often associated with that, doesn't seem to have much to, in common with China. But since the first time I was in China and now, I've always felt there's an unexpected connection between the South and China. When I taught a literature class, I presented many different writers to the students, and one of the biggest surprises was how much the students liked and related to Flannery O'Connor. It wasn't the Catholicism they were responding to, it was the Southernness that they felt was somehow familiar to them. It's very interesting. So anyway, to play this in Chongqing while thinking about where I'm from, even though at the time I don't think I connected to this music, I don't know, it was a great experience last year. Finally, very quickly, the best shmup I played, the best shoot 'em up, and that is Devil Blade Reboot. I've long loved shmups. Some of my favorite games back in the 90s were shmups, but I keep trying, every year or two I'll try a new shmup or a supposed classic, and it's very hard to find ones that, do anything for me. Either their aesthetics are off or they're too difficult, and I have limited patience to learn a bullet hell game. This game is perfect difficulty. In fact, I played it so many, I think I beat the game 10 or more times, which is very unusual for me. It's just got this not only perfect difficulty, but a kind of risk-reward system that normally I pay no attention to. Increasing your score means generally nothing to me. But here, what it asked you to do to go into a kind of berserk mode was to get close to enemies, right? The closer you get right up in their face, which is dangerous. This would increase things. This would actually send the game into a kind of different state. And I really enjoyed that. The game is short and crunchy. You can play through it 20, 25 minutes, I think. I'm not sure. Maybe shorter. It's, a very focused, simple game. You've got two states, a kind of wide and quick shot versus a focused, slower, but more powerful shot. There is a lot of prediction involved. Enemies will swoop in almost Galaga style, and you get a brief warning before they show up. So you have this ever so slight delay. This is not like twitch reflex or even memorization. That slight warning gives you that slight delay, which lets you plan just a little bit, lets you react just a little bit, gives you just enough room to sync with it without having to master it. When I play shmups, I really want to synchronize with the machine, to feel the pleasure of being overwhelmed, of on the edge of death, of just finding a path through bullets or just surviving. And I really find that overwhelm and that sinking very pleasurable. And Devil Blade Reboot gave that to me like no shmup I've played in many, many, many years. So just like with my books and shows, I want to spend a bit more time talking about my very favorite games of last year. In this case, there were two of them. The first was the best daily game that I played in a tab on my browser, the best philosophical machine of sorts, the best game that offered an interface with the human and the inhuman, both. This game was Infinite Craft. Now, this game is fairly straightforward and yet a bit difficult to describe, at least what I find, I think, most interesting about it. In the game, you have a playfield and you have a sidebar. In the sidebar are 4 buttons: fire, water, earth, and air. The word and then a little emoji beside it. And then you basically can combine those buttons, those words, in different ways. You can put water and earth together to create mud. You can put mud and fire together to create, I think, clay. And on and on. You can keep combining things, even combine, water with itself, I think, to create like a flood. And you can keep doing this, as the title promises, infinitely. Now, pretty soon I started to make, to me, some pretty surprising, interesting things. I began to kind of play it daily. I would play it, 30 minutes a day. I would play until I found I'd made something interesting or surprising. And what that was would change each day. One day I made a time machine in Back to the Future, the movie. But when I made the fear of time travel somehow that I thought, okay, interesting, and I stopped for the day. One day I made Tuesday. That was interesting. I made afternoon. So these are things that, other people had made. You are finding things in common that other people have made. This is most of what you do. But occasionally you will make what is called a unique discovery. This is something that no one else in the world has yet created. It gives you a little special mark. You're the first to find or make this thing. So for instance, I made something called quantum autumn field theory for the first time. I made Sweet Pink Death and Pink Death Bubble Tea. I made a game called Super Mario Revelation 2. I somehow made Roberto Bolaño, the Chilean writer. Someone else had not gotten to him first. I made something called The Darkest Timeline, the middle chapter, and something that clearly never came to be in reality, something called Fortnite Redemption. The last unique discovery I made was The Blind Wind, and that kind of was my final off-ramp. But you end up making tons of interesting things. Sometimes I, would want to make something specific. I would come in on a day and think, how could I make Asuka from Evangelion? So I would start to trace it back. Well, I need to make Evangelion, which means I probably need to make anime, which means I probably need to make Japan. And so you begin to trace it back like that and try to figure out, you can set your own goal and how do I get there? You'll also encounter, occasionally these kind of like the limits of the thing, of kind of dead ends, I guess you could call them, where if you make Batman, for instance, so many things lead back to Batman. Somehow, when you combine Batman with many other things, it just creates more Batman. So some things are so powerful, they kind of absorb things. You can, there's many ways to make Batman. There's many ways to make Trump. He absorbs things too. Wukong, Monkey King, once you make him, he will begin to it's hard to get away from him. You can kind of get caught in a loop where you can't get out, and it becomes like the challenge of the day to make something to get away from those things. Anyway, the more that I played this, I just found it fascinating as this kind of machine of words. Who was it that said, poetry is a machine made of words? I think William Carlos Williams. And I began to feel this. I'm looking at my screen and seeing all these word clouds together, things leading to other things, helping me sometimes think something through that I hadn't expected. There's a kind of a breakdown of the world into parts, into little units, little monads, and then putting them back together in unexpected ways. So you get all of these, unexpected juxtapositions and syntheses. And it ends up being a weirdly kind of philosophical experience about, as you think, what plus what equals what? What would that make? You kind of have a sense before you put things together, and then sometimes you're right, and sometimes you're really surprised. Sometimes the game can be very funny what it spits out sometimes. It also made me think a lot about just how much of our thinking, how deeply our thinking is associative. We like to think about thought as if it's, about logic or reason or even emotional thinking. But I think sometimes even more basic than that in everyday way is associative thinking, right? It's primary and hard to talk about sometimes, but foundational. The way that things just rub up against each other and become bonded. We see this all the time online, sometimes the taint of association, especially in social media. But I think it's really fundamental in the way our brains work, and there's something that this game makes really visible, makes that associative thinking and associative logic really visible. So I played this early 2024 for a little while and began to, I don't know at what point I realized this, but it was, probably a weekend. I made something and I thought, there is no way that the creator of this game anticipated me. There's no way that this was made. No program could produce and have a sense to it too, because it wasn't just nonsense usually when I would put things together. There was some sort of a logos to the whole thing. So I looked up a little bit more about it and discovered very quickly, oh, of course, this uses AI. There's no way that this game could be made otherwise. There are other crafting games where, it's handcrafted. This is not handcrafted. This uses a large language model, and this gave me pause, of course. Now, AI itself doesn't really scare me that much. Not the AI itself. What scares me are the tech bros who create and want to use it. The ambitious MBAs and CEOs, they scare me. Any thieves of labor and art, they scare me. Politicians and AI, that scares me. The AI itself, though, I'm not agnostic about it exactly. I think at this point it's quite scary the way it's being used. But back at the beginning of 2024, a lot's changed in a year and a half. And back then, I thought, I kind of want to explore this and see where it goes. The creator of this is not a money-making venture. He has a history of making, these playful philosophical games. And this seems like something you couldn't make any other way. This is not a story about AI. This is using AI to kind of explore AI. It's an encounter with AI, with people, not an individual creator, though I think the creator did train this LLM, but it's still recognizably the internet. There's something about people here, people in the aggregate, not one individual person. So there is something very human about the results here, and very inhuman, and this interested me. I felt like even with what appeared to be the sincere and earnest, origins of this, it still left this taint, this association that was uncomfortable, and often the results were a little uncanny or creepy in the way that AI can be. And even as the world is becoming more consumed by AI, this game felt like a chance to lightly kind of explore, to feel out the logic of it, and to feel out myself, a human mind, not an AI, facing it, interfacing with it. This got me thinking more and more about what I think games can offer sometimes. Games, like all art, offer us some relief from our present crisis. They provide a space not apart from the world, and certainly not from the politics of the world, but they can offer a kind of pocket reality, a sidestep, something that might give us a spare moment or a moment spared, a chance to see something a little differently, perhaps clearer, without the world and reality kind of breathing down our neck. I can't think very well under sometimes the conditions of the world, especially about things that are as looming and difficult and as scary as AI. And I am glad that games can offer a way, a mode, a zone to be in that can be both super serious and absolutely not. The world seems to be being consumed by AI, and I can encounter it without kind of going down with the ship here. A game like this lets me explore feelings about AI, about the human interfacing with it without submitting to all the consequences of AI. How does interfacing with an AI feel? I've barely done it. I don't use ChatGPT. I don't use any of those. But I am curious about how we interface with machines. I mean, my long history of games has been about that in part. And I feel like this game does speak to this moment, our moment. It speaks to the present in a very specific and powerful way. And I feel like I need to feel out these machines, to experiment with, these aggregates of humanity without being beholden to them, within the boundary of, games and art, and without constantly, sweating every consequence. That said, would I play this now, a year and a half later? I'm not sure. A lot's changed since then. I was certainly concerned back then, but AI hadn't quite infiltrated my classroom in the way that it absolutely has the past year. Even in things like journals, where I'm not talking about like hard essays or something. I can ask my students to keep a journal while watching Andor or watching Pose or watching Unbelievable. And occasionally I get AI for personal journals. It's quite scary. It's not that hard to tell yet with those, and then I get AI hallucinations at times that are quite funny about the shows that are being watched. But yeah, there's something now that feels a little different. The association of AI, the taint is so destabilizing and corrosive. It's so alienating and dread-inducing that maybe if I played it now, it's the unique kind of qualities and power of this game might be lost. It does feel like an artifact of early 2024 to me, and seems to somehow like represent it a little bit in my mind. Back then, I was nervous, but I didn't feel AI as keenly. It still felt thinkable and imaginable, and now it feels inescapable. A constant threat or a dark joke. It's something else, and I really don't know if my interest. I'm not against the game or anything now, but I don't know if I would be interested to play as much. I think that happens. Games come in a time and a place, and how you feel, what motivates you to try them, what gets you to keep playing them. And I played this every day for a month or two, but things shift, things change, and I just don't know. That time has passed. What I do like, still looking back on this game, is that it gave me a chance to play with something scary. I think games offer a really good chance to play with scary things. I watch my daughter play with things, and it's not all fun and games. She likes to play with scary emotions. She'll want me to be sad or want me to be mad sometimes. She likes to play doctor and wants to play at, not just fixing hurts, but getting hurt. So many games, whether it's with violence or there's all sorts of things that games they let us play with that are terrifying in life. And games offer us a space to explore them and play with them and feel them out differently. Infinite Craft is not a critique of AI, but it certainly offers an encounter with AI that a playful one, and to me a valuable one, and for me it was one of the most powerful game experiences I had in 2024. Okay, so now I finally want to talk about the very best game I played in 2024. It was a huge surprise to me. I was not expecting it at all. And that was Black Myth: Wukong. Now, I almost didn't play Black Myth Wukong. It seems that last year I almost didn't play my favorites or read or watch my favorites at all. If my sister hadn't given me alphabetical diaries, I wouldn't have read my favorite book. If my daughter had not wanted to watch Bluey, I wouldn't have seen my favorite show. And there were a few factors that kind of came together to lead me to actually play Black Myth Wukong. I was interested from when I first saw it a few years ago. Interested both because it was a, major Chinese game, and even before I came back to China, I knew I wanted to know gaming better there. But also I was just interested in a game focused on Wukong. I have not read Journey to the West at the time. I've since started it last fall after I played the game. I'll say a little bit more about that later. But I knew who he was. I was interested in him as a figure. And yeah, I thought it looked fun in the preview. But when I learned that it was kind of a Souls-like and supposedly a boss rush, I'm tired of Souls-likes. I can take them occasionally, but last summer I'd already played Shadow of the Erdtree, the Elden Ring expansion, was quite disappointed by that and just kind of exhausted by it. I have so little time to play big games that when I invest in them and they disappoint me, it can really kind of sap my energy to try again. Bosses are my least favorite things about Souls-like, so I began to become skeptical. So that when the time came and I got back to China last fall, I just didn't feel like it. I wanted to talk to my students about it. As classes approached, I knew that some of them would play it. All my students play games, and I knew some of them would be into this. But still, I wasn't sure. And then classes were delayed by a week because of an outrageous heat wave. The summers here are so brutal. And this was extra brutal last September. So they delayed classes for a week, and I thought, okay, I've got the time. Let's give it a try. Immediately, I was impressed. I was really, really taken with just how rich the world was. The first thing that became famous about Black Myth Wukong in the previews was the graphics. It looked incredible. But when you actually play it, sure, it looks great, but is actually the richness, what those graphics are used for, the richness of the world, the detail. There is this excess. There is this muchness everywhere, down into the menus, everywhere. There's so much. And not just repeated kind of tile sets or whatever. I think I've read since that, they went around and scanned in a lot of monuments, a lot of statues. I mean, I was shocked at there's so many things that just seem bespoke. They were not repeated. And I was wondering how they did this. So there's just so much. I'd heard people talk after this game, they were calling it mid. I mean, I hate that word, but it's just completely inaccurate here. This game is max. It is always max. There's nothing mid about it. And in fact, the richness and the excess and the muchness really creates this kind of world feeling. World is not just size. It comes in that excess. It comes in something that is not only for us, that is more than us, more than you can take in. The world is not just an idea, right? It's not a dream where everything reflects the dreamer, the gamer, but something beyond us. And this game immediately, despite not being an open world game, had this muchness, this excess. It also immediately felt very warm. Such a warm game. So many Souls-likes their worlds are quite cold. They're dead. This was alive. This was warm and generous. That muchness, that warmth, it gave you this feeling. I mean, even when you finish a chapter, there are these little films that play in different styles, different anime styles. There's a stop motion one that's incredible. It's just like a feast, not an excess of waste, but an excess of richness, a celebration almost. It's like a feast for a guest. It's overwhelming and really wonderful. Now, the story itself, while focused on Wukong, and you see him at the beginning, who you actually play is him in form, but does not have his personality. I wondered how I'd heard Wukong was quite a character and how he would kind of fit into this. It's really, not a story about Wukong. It is a cycle of stories. It's actually about breaking cycles, but it is a cycle of stories, not unlike Demon Souls, a collection of smaller stories that reflect on Wukong. It's a sequel to Journey to the West, but also kind of a retelling. And through the story, you learn about Wukong, but not directly. This is kind of a story that there's a kind of absent center, right? Your avatar, your chosen monkey is absent. There's this sense, that kind of that Wallace Stevens line, "I am what surrounds me." That feels like this in this game. You see yourself through others and their stories. And there is like a secret revolution going on in this game. It is not exactly what it appears, the real story, the true ending. It's really fascinating. This is a story about someone who, Wukong himself, is extremely powerful and kind of an immortal, but doesn't exactly have true freedom. And how he goes about seeking that, how he refuses to be a pawn in kind of the celestial games, is really fascinating. Like, the deep story here is truly very interesting, though not totally easy to access. I had not read Journey to the West when I played this. After I finished it, I started volume 1. Really loved it immediately. Immediately saw the appeal of Wukong as a character. He's just like a star from like page 1 when you meet him. And I'm going to finish it this year. I've got the other volumes that I'm going to continue with. But even the first volume I read after playing, I was amazed at all the details that were showing up in the game. For one small example, early on in the game, you see not a boss, but kind of like a wandering boss-like figure called the Wandering Wight. He's this giant monk-like figure with a big head and a bigger forehead. And you can take him on. If you beat him, then you can transform into him briefly, kind of like a power. And he does this massive headbutt. So people usually remember him because he's one of the first guys you meet like that. I was reading the first volume of Journey to the West and encountered a monk at the temple he's near. And there's a story about this monk coveting like a special outfit that Wukong and his party, the Tang monk and them, have. And when he tries to steal it and gets found out, he ends up committing suicide by bashing his head into the wall. So this move that I'd gotten, I'm going to have to play it again once I finish Journey to the West to just see how it all adds up or tracks. But I was like, is that move that I used throughout the entire game? Because the Wandering Wight I used throughout, and he's great. Was that a suicide move he was doing every time, that headbutt? The game is full of this kind of like detail. It's drawing upon, a rich text, and a culture of such depth and richness that like you just feel it everywhere. This is true with the bosses too. The bosses, not the Wandering Wight, but the bosses you fight. There are a ton of them. It's true. Like the boss rush thing, which so put me off, it's not totally untrue. This is a game you spend more time fighting bosses than out in the world. And generally, I don't like that. I like a hard world, not crazy hard bosses. And the world here is not hard. The bosses are where the difficulty is. In something like, Sekiro, I really dislike that the world was kind of trivial, but then you had to master the bosses, do exactly what you were taught. I don't like those kind of tests. The bosses here are not that. They're not repeated. There's over 100. And it's a testament that, for me, who does not like boss rushes, does not really enjoy bosses in general. I don't get any pleasure out of beating them. I get no sense of accomplishment. I just want to get past them. And that I sought out every boss here. I wanted to see them. Every secret boss, all the way to the secret final boss. Because the bosses here were less like a fight, less like definitely not like, didn't feel like a test. It felt like a dance. It felt like the boss and I were kind of equals. It wasn't this like towering figure and I'm this little, guy hacking away at the ankles. No, some of them are big, but they're powerful and I'm powerful. Your monkey has, quite an array of abilities and can change them at will. This is not like a strict, choose your path. You can respec at no cost. So this fight among equals, and it's not where they, hit you once. There's no one-shots here. It's a battle of attrition on both sides. I really like that kind of thing where you can make mistakes. It is not, one fuck up and you're done. And while you're fighting, it is so expressive. Like the boss move, the move sets are so expressive of their character, of the story they're involved in. Their move sets tell stories, show personality, as you do. It really feels like an encounter when you are with these bosses. You got a meeting of persons, not simply something you have to beat down. The bosses are somehow kind of honorable, dignified, and they feel in turn like they and the game is kind of respecting you. There's something respectful about these encounters. They are extremely difficult. I don't want to play that down. That can usually really turn me off. So it is a testament to the boss design, to the experience of that dance, that I wanted to do it. I wanted to learn my moves. I wanted to learn the steps. And the difficulty, like any dance with different partners, it's not easy. But like I said, you have many options. It feels inviting, gives you options, lets you play around with them. It's not a test. It's not one way. It's a drama to play out. For you to play your part in and to feel the emotion of that drama, feel the emotion of the fight. They're really, really amazing. Now, one thing that did kind of surprise me early on, you immediately begin to encounter invisible walls throughout the game. And like with the boss fights, like there's many things that this game kind of made me rethink. I think one of the things I appreciated most about Black Myth: Wukong is how it made me rethink some things I thought I knew about games, how I thought about bosses, how I thought about excess and this level of richness. The invisible walls you encounter. Invisible walls are kind of an old thing in games that gamers have long, gotten upset by. I think early on, it was just a clear limit. You couldn't go everywhere. The game couldn't handle worlds that big. So there would be a fence, sometimes, just waist high, and you couldn't get over it. You would long for that place in the distance and be excited when games kind of let you do that. And when I first encountered the invisible walls, they're striking because they look like places you can go. It's not like, there'll be something in the distance and there's no reason you can't go there and there's an invisible wall. And it feels a little frustrating at first. You begin to think, do I need to check? Like, what I see is not what is. I can't just rely on what I see because these are invisible walls, right? The more I played, though, the less they bothered me and the more they began to kind of interest me, because I started to think, like, why do we rail against invisible walls so much? More than, visible walls. That's the alternative, right? A visible wall. If you can't have invisible walls and they have to be visible, that means, if you want to guide the player in a certain way, you have to create the walls, right? And anyone who played games a long time can kind of look at a level, can look at a path and see where you're supposed to go, right? This is considered good game design, right? To kind of guide you along subtly, like, invisible hand. And you begin to rely on that. You begin to rely on the little variances to find secrets and stuff like that. Here, you couldn't always believe your eyes. You didn't know what was accessible until you pushed up against it, even when, there was a patch of ground right there. And it made me think about how if you take away this assumption that walls must be visible, it allows you to design spaces differently. Because if you can design a space and not have to create kind of fake walls to create the arena, guide the gamer, then it gives you a lot more kind of actually flexibility to design the space and just say, yep, this is the world. You can't go over there. You can go here, though. And the more I played, because I was enjoying so much of the rest and because what was there was so good. I wasn't like looking in the distance being like, oh, if I could only go there. I was happy to be where I was. I wanted to dwell in the place I was, in that game space. There was that richness there, that muchness. I wanted to be there. Now, there is a point later in the game where you briefly, the walls kind of fall away, I'll say, that you have more freedom for a brief amount of time. But when I got that, at first it's kind of exhilarating and then quickly kind of goes away. It's not more interesting to go anywhere you want. I was glad it didn't last that long. It's kind of boring to get to go to do anything, it's like you're some kind of immortal. Immortality gets boring and being able to go wherever you want, it's not as interesting as constraint. Black Myth: Wukong is a game built on constraints. It's full of secrets, even secret worlds, but they're hidden within the constraints. The entire secret story of the true ending is hidden in the constraints. It's really has this idea that within constraints you can You can do a lot. You can pull off some wild things. Like I said, the true ending is about that within the constraints. And it made me think about how much a world actually, it comes from the constraints. It comes from the limits. A world is not built out of unlimited freedom. That breaks the world. A world is defined by its limits, like our lives are defined by their limits. And this is good. This is beautiful. I thought while playing this, like, am I entering into like a post-open world era? The open world is kind of dominated for so long, but it feels like there's this exhaustion about it. In designing it, it's kind of whatever it promised years ago. Whether it fulfilled that or not, it's just not first of all, not the only way to design a world, obviously, but I think I'm not the only one who's feel kind of exhausted by this particular kind of open world that has been dominant for a decade or two. And I think that with that, the kind of freedom that those open worlds offer seems suspect to me. Freedom to do what? To go wherever you want, to, tromp through other people's houses and mess things up or steal stuff, or I don't know what kind of freedom that is. What's that worth? I feel like there's this, with a lot of big worlds, open worlds, there's this freedom fantasy, right? You move through the space without consequence. You own that space in many ways. You've got a naughty ghost going wherever you want, or a spoiled child can do whatever you want, what you can't do in life. But I don't know what kind of freedom that is. It sounds to me like the freedom to be an idiot, which has its place, don't get me wrong, but all the time, in every place where I want to be a person, I want to inhabit a role, not just like run wild myself. That just gets boring after a while. I don't know what's wrong with not knowing the exact boundaries, with having to test them, with imperfect, even illusory visual communication. I often feel like the perfect illusion of games, like that is demanded. You want like no slowdown, a stable frame rate, no seams showing, right? No janky edges. That too is a kind of fantasy of a perfect illusion, perfect verisimilitude. Wukong really made me question a lot of assumptions about gaming. And by gaming, I'm really talking about Western gaming, Western and Japanese gaming. Assumptions about freedom and illusion and open worlds and even invisible walls and boss rushes. And especially like what I even think about, these open worlds, and now if we could move into something post-open world, what other worlds could there be? What kind of constraints could create new worlds? And how could we understand the value of those constraints? Now, of course, Black Myth Wukong has been very meaningful here in China. My students did immediately want to talk to me about it, had I played it. And I think a lot of people outside of China don't quite get what it means. I think a lot of Westerners are so used to the importance of their popular culture, of it being respected, that to understand when you have a culture as rich and deep as Chinese culture, but that is told it has a soft power problem, right? That it doesn't translate, it doesn't export, that it can be hard to really grasp like what's at stake here. I saw online where one of the developers at one of maybe the Game Awards or something, didn't win. It didn't win Game of the Year, and he had prepared a speech and was crying, so upset. He really thought they would win. And I saw some people online mocking this as if, get a grip. And I'm like, fuck off. No, it's good to care, actually. It's good to put this much, so much is put into this game, and to see people responding to it as they did, and to hope for some recognition, to hope that to be seen. Anyway, I was glad to play it here. I was glad to talk to my students about what it might mean for other gamers outside of China to play it. And I really, in thinking about Western gaming, was after I played it, and read some stuff online about it, and I know that it was popular. I know that many people loved it, but a lot of the gaming press, a lot of critics, however they exist these days, I was baffled by, why aren't you more interested in this? Why aren't you going to try it? This is offering really an alternate history. This has got a different development history behind it than so much of Western gaming. The game I was actually most excited about last September when I played Black Myth Wukong was UFO 50, because I wanted this alternate history. I wanted to see how things might have been otherwise in the 80s. Now, UFO 50 didn't end up doing that for me, and maybe I'll talk about that in another video. But actually, Black Myth Wukong, in many surprising ways, offered kind of an alternate history and an alternate future. One thing I noticed playing it was just, it didn't feel as influenced by platformers. I don't just mean Mario, but I mean, like, it's hard to kind of get at, but it just felt like while playing it in a 3D space that it was less interested in like kind of 3D visual perspective and the edges of that space, as a place to hide secrets or to try to look around. The world was there, but the physicality of it seemed to draw on some different ideas. The world is just not what you see. You can't trust your eyes or your cleverness. It seemed to be coming from a different tradition. And I would think that Western gamers would be excited to learn another tradition, to see games that don't come out of the same influences that they're used to. Not every game designer has played Mario and, kind of taken in all of its lessons, but instead is operating on a different frequency and in a different mode with a different background. That's tremendously exciting. It's not just gamers, but this kind of Western ignorance mixed with arrogance and kind of cultural centrality they're so used to, I think really missed out on a really not just great game, and not just an important game, but a game that's really challenges in some obvious and some subtle ways the assumptions of so much what makes a good game. The ending of Black Myth Wukong, I'm not going to really give much away, but you end up facing kind of an older version of yourself, petrified version. And there's this sense in which that the game throughout is asking you to be flexible, to push yourself and not be frozen, not be a shell. It's asking you to access some sort of like, I don't know what to call it, not an emptiness exactly, but maybe something, a space inside you that doesn't know what is good, doesn't know what is what about games. As people like myself who played games so long, you begin to think what it is, what's going on. And there is something here that is asking you to create a space within yourself. Yeah, sure, to face the bosses, but to encounter the game on its terms and not bring everything you think you know. It's like that Taoist idea that, a jar, its form is necessary, but it's actually the emptiness that makes it work, the emptiness inside. And there's something in your emptied out monkey here that you are slowly learning to inhabit. And as you play this game, stay fluid and flexible, keep moving. This is not a parrying game. This is not a tanking game. This is you better dodge. You better keep going. You better keep moving. There's something in the flow of this game that, to me, is shot through the whole experience, and asks you to stay flexible, to stay open, not narrow like so much of adult life, not narrow like so much of gaming life, where you just repeat the same things over and over. Like what is good. I like that video games too can remind me that the world is so wide. The world is so wide. Chinese culture at its best really embraces difference. It's deeply heterodox. There's so many people and so many ways of being that it has to kind of make room for all of that. It cannot have one way of being, a mono theism, a mono culture, a mono anything. And I felt like this game, I felt like Black Myth Wukong embraced this heterodoxy. Maybe it's a little strange to say that video games too can remind us that the world is wide, that the world is worth loving. There is so much evil in the world right now, so much. It is hard to love the world, to look at the world and to find it worth loving. And it's, like I said, it's unusual. It's maybe strange to say a game could make you feel the wideness of the world, could even make you love the world a little bit more. But Black Myth Wukong did. And for that, I'm really grateful. So that's everything for my best of 2024. Like I said, if you're interested in my complete lists, I do keep them on my website. I'm well into 2025 now, but I did want to talk about these before moving on to more present things. Next, I plan to talk about the worst books and shows and games, because I think it is really important to talk about those too. I think that we can learn a lot from what we dislike, from even what we hate, and I think it's worth talking about. So I'll be working on that and put it out pretty soon. In the meantime, I'm not really sure how to end this. I've never made a video, so yeah, thank you for listening.